this. In the last 3 weeks, some of you may know that there was quite a political storm that emerged, particularly among journalists, over the issue of cultural appropriation. A number of journalists got in real trouble for transgressing the politically correct norms in relationship to cultural appropriation, a tremendously ill-defined and, let's call it, pathological concept. We could start with that. But the thing that was so interesting, and I think I probably talked to 10 of Canada's top 20 journalists, but that would be a reasonable estimate, most of them in print, but not all of them. Every single one of them told me that they were censoring themselves. Now you think about that, man. That's no joke. In a country like this, and these people, you'd think, well, if anyone has power, they have power. It's like, well, they don't really have power. They have competence and influence, and that's not the same thing as power. And they're bloody afraid of being hung out to dry if they say the wrong thing. You think about where our damn country is when the 10 most powerful journalists in the country are afraid to write and say what they think. That's not a good thing, man. That's not a good thing. I don't care what it is that they want to say or think. The fact that they're, not only did they tell me that they were censoring themselves and that they felt that they would be hung out to dry if they said the wrong thing, but they also told me that they were being censored by their editors. And so, you know, in a country that has a great tradition, right, and a tradition that's much longer than this country has been around, of freedom and free speech and free press, for us to be in a situation now where our major journalists are afraid that if they misstep inappropriately in this newfound political landmine, that they're going to be done. That is not good, right? That's a bad diagnostic sign. Okay, well, I said that story was a little intro to the other story I was going to tell you. And then, so I've been fortunate enough over the last several months to meet not the majority of the people who ran for the leadership of the Federal Conservative Party, but most of them, including the people, the person who, Andrew, who recently won. And they all told me the same thing, which was also interesting, was that the Conservatives were afraid to be conservative, and for exactly the same reason. They were afraid that if they put forward valid conservative perspectives, that they would be isolated and mobbed and taken down. And that made them censor themselves and not be willing to speak up. And I thought, and I told each of them when we discussed this, the same thing was, if you guys are afraid to talk, you've already lost. You might as well just pack up and go home. It's done. Now, you know, as a psychologist, look, I got to say, I'm not making a case for conservatism. I'm not here to make a political case, right? I'm here to make a philosophical and psychological case. And I think that's what I've been doing all along. It has political implications. So I'm not saying that you should be conservative or that conservative is the only way to be, because I actually don't believe that for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is that I know that political belief is determined in large part by temperament and personality, and that's very strongly biologically influenced. And so conservatives tend to be lower in openness, which is a trait associated with creativity, and higher in conscientiousness, which is a trait associated with industriousness and orderliness. They tend to make good managers and administrators and lawyers. They tend to make good conservative business types. That's their forte, that's their niche, and that's a valid place to be and a valid thing to be. And you know, conservatives aren't so good at being entrepreneurial, and they're not so good at being artistic and creative. That's not their niche. That's more the niche of the liberal end of the spectrum. And as far as I'm concerned, for the political system to function properly, you need proper representation for all the temperamental types, and they need to be engaged in dialogue. So, but the thing is that when the conservatives are saying, well, you know, especially when they're perhaps thinking about leading the damn party, let's say, that they're worried about speaking their mind in a conservative manner, that's just not a good thing. That means that something's gone wrong with our political system, and seriously wrong. You know, and the other thing that, another thing that I've noticed is, you know, when this all, some of you may know and some of you may not know that I made a couple of videos back September 27th. I woke up one night because I couldn't sleep, and I thought, I usually go and write if I can't sleep because I've got something to figure out. But I've been playing with YouTube videos. I've been putting my lectures online since 2013, and by last April they had about 1 million views. And so I thought, wow, that's really something, man. You know, like, you write a book and you sell 1 million copies, you're one happy character. And I thought, 1 million views is a very large number of views. It really tuned me into the fact that YouTube was something completely other than what I thought it was. But anyways, that night I thought, oh, I'll get up, I'll make a video instead of writing it down. And this was a video about Bill C-16, which, by the way, the Senate just passed, right? Half the conservatives voted for it, despite the fact that the Justice Minister was presented with an amendment that clearly indicated that Bill C-16 would not infringe upon free speech, and refused to consider the amendment. So that's where we are. There's compelled speech is now the law in Canada. It isn't yet, but it's going to be very soon. And half the conservatives voted for that damn bill. And I can tell you too, you know, people have gone after me for being, you know, anti-transgender and bigoted and phobic and all that nonsense that the left tends to hurl at people. It's not the case. I read that damn legislation, and I read the policies surrounding it, and I know perfectly well that the way it's formulated right now, it will do more harm to the people it purports to protect than good. That'll take about 10 years to unfold, but it's so incoherent, and the principles upon which that legislation and its surrounding policies are based are so paradoxical and contradictory that they will act themselves out, because that's what happens with paradoxical beliefs, and tangle people up. And we'll see that happen over the next decade. And it's partly because the people who put Bill C-16 forward, especially with regards to its surrounding policies, the ones that are detailed out on the Ontario Human Rights Commission website, don't give a damn about transgendered people as far as I'm concerned. There's another agenda at work that's driving their entire political force forward, and the transgender types were just flavor of the month, right? They were poster boys for moving this postmodern agenda forward. And so the fact that the legislation isn't going to do them any good, do the transgendered people any good, isn't going to stop the people who put the legislation forward. So anyways, I made these videos and I put them on YouTube, and well, to say they caused a storm is somewhat of an understatement. I mean, it's just been, I don't even know what to think about. It's completely and absolutely surreal what's happened to me. And I think now about 50 million people have watched videos associated with this sequence of events that I'm describing, which is just 350,000 people watched the testimony that I gave before the Senate on Bill C-16. You bloody well know that the apocalypse is close when 350,000 people around the world watch a Canadian Senate hearing. It's like, really, I mean, really, what's going on, man? And you know, when I put myself out and made these videos, which I really didn't expect to attract much attention at all, I just assumed that I was going to clarify what I was thinking a little bit, and you know, and see what happened. I kind of a curious person. That'll teach me, but I'm kind of a curious person, and so but then, you know, I also experienced firsthand what happens when you do something like that. Now, I got nailed, right? I got, especially for about 3 months, things were pretty up in the air. The university sent me 2 letters telling me that it was so funny, because I made this video and I said, you know, under this new legislation, making this video, criticizing this legislation is probably illegal. And so then and people, of course, reacted to me as if I was scaremongering, which, by the way, was the right response. When you hear someone in a stable society stand up and say, excuse me, there's something rotten at the base here, and it's affecting the manner in which the legislation that our country is producing is being rolled forth. When they say that, you should think that person is probably a charlatan and has something wrong with them. Because look, the culture works pretty good. The country has worked really well for a long period of time. And so the logical initial response should be, yeah, you think there's a fundamental problem. Why shouldn't we just assume that there's a fundamental problem with you? And one of the ways that you determine that is you throw things at the person metaphorically and see if any of them stick, right? So, you know, I was a bigot and a homophobe and a transphobe and a racist. That one, I don't know where the hell that one came from. I think it was because I criticized the 2, what would you call, reprehensible women who started the Black Lives Matter movement in Toronto. It isn't because they're black, it's because they're reprehensible. Black or white, man. If you're reprehensible, you're reprehensible. That's sort of the definition of not being racist, right? So anyways, so there were a couple of demonstrations, and then the press jumped on me to some degree. They didn't do too bad a job, I didn't think. And then The university thankfully wrote 2 letters saying that what I was doing was probably illegal and that it violated the Ontario Human Rights Commission's policies and probably the university's policies as well, as far as they were concerned, which really wasn't the case. And the letters also contained a number of untruths, which I detailed because I read them on YouTube too, which is actually quite helpful and handy that, you know, if someone writes me a letter that purports to lay out a set of facts, then I can just read it. I don't even have to comment on it. I can read it and let people make up their own minds, which they did. So my job was in doubt. But the fact that the university went after me actually turned out to be extremely helpful, right? Because I had said, look, under the provisions of this new legislation, and legislation like this that's already in place in Canada, what I am doing, criticizing this bill, is probably illegal. And everyone said, no, you're crazy, you know, there's something wrong with you, you're a scaremonger and a rabble-rouser and all of that. And then the university wrote a letter saying what you did violated the university policy and probably the Ontario Human Rights Commission's policies and the law. And I thought, great, you had your lawyers take a look at it. I couldn't have asked for a stronger statement in support of what I had said, especially because it certainly wasn't written in support of what I had said. So, and then the journalists started to pay attention to what I had actually looked at, and they read it, and they thought, oh, hey, look at that. That Ontario Human Rights Commission website policy mess is actually quite a nest of spiders, just like he said. And so it turns out that there is something rotten in the state of Denmark, and that's just not so good. And so, like, this is a good country, man. That's why people want to come here. It's one of the best countries in the world. Maybe it's the best country in the world. I mean, we don't want to get too high on our horse about that, and God, aren't we fortunate? But it's a pretty good place, you know, but it's not what it used to be. And the people who are running it are not who you think they are. So, for example, provincially, let's take it, the title that the people who follow Kathleen Wynne have is liberal. They are not liberals. They are radicals. And they're radicals of a sort. I used to work for the NDP when I was a kid, back in the 70s. And the people who are influential in Kathleen Wynne's government and who are making the sort of policies that I regard as particularly reprehensible are the kind of radical leftists that the NDP working class socialists that I knew in the 1970s would have regarded as the unacceptable fringe of the Socialist Party. And they have now defined themselves as centrist liberals. They are not. And what they're doing is not centrist, and it's not liberal.